All right, welcome everybody to Salesforce.org Architect Academy. We're going to talk about building an integration strategy today, and actually let me share my screen. So I am Tom Letty, and joining me today is my colleague Richard Booth. There we go. In fact, what I'm going to do is present. All right, so as I said, I'm Tom Letty, the Director of Advisory Services at Salesforce.org, and joining me is Richard Booth. If you want to say hi, Richard.
Thanks, Tom. Hey, everybody. I'm Richard Booth, Customer Success Architect over here in EMEA. And like Tom, I've got a real interest in making integration work for customers. It's an interesting area, so today should be a good chat.
Yeah, it is. This is something that I don't think I've had a single engagement that integration hasn't come up in some form or another. So really looking forward to this. I know that we did a webinar a little while back, which is actually in the related materials that you can see down below. And we've got a white paper, and both of those have gotten a ton of downloads, a ton of views. And I know this is a topic that's near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. A couple other logistical things actually. So there's also a chat down below that you can use if you have any questions, and we'll be answering them as we go along. Of course, it would not be any kind of Salesforce presentation without a forward-looking statement. So just make sure that if we talk about anything here, you're only buying things that we already have for sale, and you're not buying anything based on any future products. That I don't know that we're really going to be talking about specific products in this, but it's still good to make sure that you're aware of that. A little bit of an overview about Architect Academy. So our mission is to increase the success of Salesforce.org customers and partners. Actually, I've been meaning to change this slide, but we're trying to increase the number of participants, expand the knowledge of Salesforce architects who serve nonprofits, higher ed, and K-12. Although, to be honest, integration is a topic that kind of spans almost every industry. But Architect Academy, if you are interested in any of our other in-person or virtual events, you can check out our Architect Academy Roundtables group in the Power of Us Hub. You can check out our webinars. We've got a number of Ask an Expert and one-on-one sessions that we do, as well as a blog series and some white papers that you can find, and some of which are linked in the related materials below. And before we get started, of course, a big thank you to everybody for joining us today for this live broadcast. It's like we said, it's a really big topic that we're looking forward to talking about. All right, so quick agenda. We're going to spend a couple minutes talking about why would you need to integrate, in some cases where you actually might not want to build an integration. So we'll talk about things like calculating ROI. We did do a little bit more of a deep dive in the white paper that we wrote. So if you download that, there's a little bit more information about how to specifically calculate ROI and everything. We'll touch on that here. And then what we'll do from there is kind of go into some whiteboarding and talk about some different models and architectures, and maybe some of the pros and cons of each ones. All right, so ROI calculations. And really, the first thing we're going to want to do is, to really think about what kind of integrations you're going to be building is to document all the attributes for them, right? So, what systems are you connecting? What's your source and target? What data are you sending over? Who owns it? How often are you sending new records? How often are there deltas? Who owns it? What's the frequency? And what's the actual method? And if you notice right here, we've got some pretty high level REST API, SOAP API. I know there's a lot more details than that, but it's at this point, what we're really doing is just kind of building out in just kind of an overall big picture of what our architecture is going to look like. And from there, then we're going to be able to kind of prioritize things and organize them into, okay, this, I've got X amount of dollars to spend. I know this integration is going to, save a lot of time, or it's going to free up my employees to do something else, or it's going to result in cleaner data because I don't have as many errors from somebody having to manually enter it into two systems, or whatever it is. Versus here's a lower priority one. I'm only updating 5 records per month, and it's not really a big deal if it's minimal work on my employees. So it'd be nice to have that automated, but it's not as high priority as some of the other integrations, as an example. And then calculating the ROI. Oh yeah, go ahead.
It's just a really good point on that slide, because you've got the one where you mentioned 5 records, for example. Mm-hmm. We talked at the beginning there about whether or not you want to maybe not integrate at all, right? Maybe it's not actually an integration option that you want to pursue. Maybe that's not something that's going to be cost effective. Once you've documented all of this content, that's where you'll really start to see some of those lower component entries just not being worth it. So why would you even think about it? It may be low impact, but maybe the effort is not worth it at all. So have that question at the front of your mind. Do you need to integrate? Is it going to provide value? I think it's a really important question to consider up front. And you might not even need to do the ROI calculation. If it is a really low number of records, maybe it's not worth it.
That's actually one of the things that I've noticed. I actually had this discussion with a customer recently where there's no benefit. That's actually one of the other things that you could think about is what's the actual benefit of sharing data between two systems? Because in some cases, it's like you're sharing data just because you can, but sending data into Salesforce from an external tool, but then you're not going to really do anything with the data in Salesforce. If you just need to report on it, there are other ways to do that than actually copying the data. So there's like Salesforce Connect as a good example, but you can also just send the data into a data warehouse and report off of it somewhere centrally. And one of the other things to keep in mind is if you've got something like in your source system where you're constantly making changes to the structure of the data, that integration is going to fail if you don't update the structure of the data in the target system as well. So if it's something that it's a small number of records and you're constantly changing things, and an example would be like surveys where you're changing survey questions every time you send one out, and the surveys are tied to a specific record, and you're doing reports on the specific surveys in the survey tool itself. Maybe there's some aggregate data you want to send to Salesforce, but you don't necessarily need every single survey response from every survey because you've got other ways to collect that data. And that's one example, and that may or may not apply to your organization. It's one of those lovely consulting answers where it all kind of depends on what you're doing and what you're going to use the data for, but it is, it could be, it's just something, this is why you put this together. It's exactly what Richard was saying is you kind of put something like this together to figure those things out. So, and then when we get into the actual ROI calculations, I know this is something we've talked about a lot where cost of, how much is it going to cost to actually not replace the manual effort, right? So this is where it comes into, okay, yeah, we do want to build an integration, because if we don't, we've got people spending hours and hours and hours just doing updates that they shouldn't need to do in a target system to make data match or to update records that, do dual entry or whatever. And then how much is it costing you to actually maintain the integration? So there's software time. This is kind of what I was talking about in the last slide, where if you have to keep making updates to your source system and then you've got to update your target system, you've got, every time you do that, you're going to have to either at the very least do some type of configuration. And if it's depending on the way your integration is built, you may also need to actually do some coding. So it's something to consider when you're building an integration.
I guess there's one effort, one extra component to add, which I know we've talked before, Tom, about, which is this idea of that intangible benefit of moving people away from repetitive manual tasks and giving them something more valuable to do because you've automated that repetitive and manual process. I think that's where integration can start. I mean, sure, it links with automation, process automation as well, but that's where integration starts having a really interesting benefit. And it's often really difficult to calculate? I mean, how do you calculate the sentiment improving in your team such that you actually want to do more because you've stopped these folks having to do really boring day in, day out tasks that they just aren't adding any value to? Connecting them back to the things that drive the mission of the organization, connecting them to processes and activities that they might actually enjoy a bit more. I mean, the impact on that on the wider group of people that are working can be quite significant sometimes. It really can. I've seen it. It shouldn't be underestimated, I think.
Yeah, some of that, it's subjective, but it's definitely worth thinking about because, especially if you think, our audience is going to mostly be schools and nonprofits here. So if you've got somebody that's really passionate about the cause of your nonprofit and you've got them sitting there doing duplicate data entry all day and they're literally spending 4 hours out of their 8-hour workday just entering the same record in two systems. It is, there's no way to put an easy number on that, but being able to say, okay, you know what, you don't have to do this anymore. And now we've actually got work for you to do that's going to help us raise more funds or going to help us serve our constituents better or whatever else they could be doing instead of that kind of grunt work. Even if you can't put a number on it, you are going to look back and be like, well, my employees they enjoy coming to work a lot more, and it does affect the overall morale of your organization. And then you get to a point where even your constituents can see that when they interact with people. So there's no real easy way, like we said, there's no real easy way to put a number on that, but it's definitely something that should be taken into consideration for sure. I think from here, I had pulled up, so I wanted to talk about a few different architectures, and so I'm going to close, whoopsies, didn't want to stop sharing, I wanted to stop presenting. Gotta love live broadcasts. What I'm going to do is share my screen again really quickly. And we are going to whiteboard out a few integration patterns. So I started out kind of with just this blank, Salesforce platform. And one of the things that, is common is people might have more than one org. So let's say they've got a second org and they want to build and let's say, let's even throw a third one in here. Now there's a couple things that we can do here. The first obvious one is, well, you know what? Salesforce has all these APIs. We can just call an API and send data here. And then we can call an API from this org and send data here. And then we can do something like this. And then we've got all this big mess of spaghetti where we've got records kind of going all over the place. And I don't know, what are my thoughts on this are this is probably not ideal. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Richard.
I think you can get yourself into trouble pretty quickly with this, right? I mean, that if you have no central way of understanding the rule base, or at least no consistent way of applying it in one or more orgs, then you're asking for trouble. Data conflicts abound.
Yeah, and the thing about this too is that when we look at here and we see, okay, we've only got 3 orgs, that's fine. But what happens too is that, a year later you say, oh, you know what, I've got this other non-Salesforce data source that I just need data out of here and I need it to go here. Oh, and you know what, I also need it to, I need some of these records over here. And then I've got this other application over here and, I really need to get some data from there into this org. Oh, and it also needs to go over here. And now all of a sudden, like you said, you've got this big spaghetti thing that's difficult to maintain. And it's also, it's difficult to maintain. It's difficult to keep track of what happens if this integration really the data shouldn't get copied from here to here until after the data from here to here, right? It goes from here to here. You're going to end up putting a whole bunch of additional custom code that you're going to have to write to kind of control that. So one of the things that we might want to do instead of this is let's get rid of some of these guys.
Well, whilst you're playing around with the diagram, Tom, I think it's worth pointing out that starting out small and starting out simply with those. Maybe it's just one object, right? Maybe it's one object that needs to exchange a subset of information between all three orgs. If you know what that is and it's not changing very often or at all, maybe that's a great way to start. Maybe that gives you a view of the complexity. Maybe it gives you a chance to get used to how that might work. But I think the point to take away from this, and I think this is where you're headed now, is that orchestration piece between data movement or elements of data moving around becomes very quickly complex when you start adding in more objects, more data conditions to consider, and more endpoints, more sources, and more targets. So I think as a starting position, hey, of course. And if you don't plan on making it any more complicated, there's every chance that will suit your purposes for quite some time. But I think really consider how you're going to manage the orchestration between multiple orgs and multiple systems is I guess the tipping point, and knowing when that tipping point occurs it takes a little bit of knowledge of your data environments and what you want to do with the data you're moving around. It's not simple, but it's certainly something you can work out.
Exactly. And so now if we look at this, we've got this ETL tool, which is exactly what you're kind of mentioning, is we can use this for process orchestration. Let's see how good my spelling skills are in a live. There we go. So we can. So now I've got these same things, so I can control. Let's say this org I've got whatever data in it that I need to send its contact data. That's just a good example. And I want to send that to these other two orgs, but I don't want to send it until after I get some kind of other input from this database over here. So I get some records that get updated. So address information, whatever. And this gets updated periodically. I can actually set something up on my, in this ETL tool where I've got an integration that'll maybe run to send the data here and update this org, and then it'll update the contact records in the other orgs, and maybe there's something over here that I'm sending to, whatever, in this database. And they'll actually happen in the order that I want them to happen. And if I really want to get fancy, we have tools in the Salesforce platform and in most ETL tools. So MuleSoft's obviously a good example because it's a Salesforce tool, but a lot of, I would say almost any ETL tool can do this, is the idea of setting up like a publish subscribe model. So, and we can use like platform events and Salesforce to do that. So rather than just building these batch integrations that say, okay, once a night, I'm going to copy every changed record from this database over to these other databases, and it's going to run for an hour, and then by the morning, everything should hopefully be updated if the integration didn't fail. I can actually set this up where every time a contact record is updated, I basically publish an event. And then over here, I've kind of got a listener that's listening for that event. And then as soon as somebody goes and updates the contact, it pushes it out. The listener then knows what to do with it and says, okay, well, I need to then update this org. I need to update this org. I need to update this database. Whatever else it needs to do as far as where that data needs to actually go. And that's one of the powers of the platform, and being able to use the platform itself in conjunction with some of these ETL tools. And one of the other things, though, like building out all these integrations is nice, but one of the things we haven't really talked about here is if something doesn't copy right, or if there's just any kind of discrepancy that you find in between two of these between two of the orgs, or between one of these orgs and one of the databases or whatever, how do you know which system wins? And I think that is that comes down to identifying your source and target systems. But one of the other things is, I know, Richard, we've actually had a few discussions about this, about, where would you see like an MDM system coming into play here?
Yeah, MDM's a really interesting area. I mean, it means a bunch of different things to, well, so many people. But let's just be clear. We mean master data management, and that means identifying which components of your entire architecture, which systems are going to be the master of particular types of data, categories of data. And that's, I mean, I've worked in different places that have different views on this, right? So some places will tell you that people data, contact data, employee data lives in ERP, and that's where it should always start. So your enterprise resource planning, your HR platforms, that kind of place. Other folks will tell you that actually we want to maintain the most up-to-date set of employee information using our employees' self-service portal. They're going to update their own information. That will be the source of truth, and that could be your Salesforce platform, and that will push to ERP. These are conversations you have to have across the business. You can't do them in isolation in IT. You can't expect to just know which people need access to which data, which people are updating your data sets, and which groups of people are going to have the most accurate or most recent data, which people have the most authority over that data. There are compliance questions here as well, because ensuring that you're not updating your from a source that's not trusted on a type of data that is going to be financially audited, or GDPR and compliance in EU obviously is a big deal here, right? So we need to be understanding that we're holding the right data in the right places, which system is most authoritative, which system is going to give you that clarity over ruling the roost for that particular type of data. It's you have to engage everyone across the business. It can't be done in isolation. That's then leads you into the conversation of which technology choice are you going to make to manage it. It can't be the other way around. I've seen it too many times where folks think they need an MDM system and then work out what to do with it. I would start the other way around. You may find it's far simpler than that, right? It might not be as complex as you think it looks like it is.
Yeah, that's actually a few good points too, is when you think about compliance issues, and that actually comes into play a little bit more than I think people even think with integrations is, so I might have this Salesforce org, and let's just say that this is the org that my sales team is using. And it might have some employee data in it, because I've got a sales manager that wants to look at somebody's forecasts for the quarter, and they want to be able to see which of their employees are going to get a bonus, right? That doesn't mean that you should be able to update that data there, and that doesn't mean that that you should be able to see anything about that employee. So we have this, you've got your employee self-service portal, you've got your ERP system, and there may be an integration between the two, and then there may be some data flowing towards this, but it's going to be a limited amount of data. It's going to be read-only. It's going to be just what the bare minimum that you need to, to not cause any regulatory issues as well. And one of the interesting things, I kind of like the way that where you went with that was the idea of thinking about master data management as almost like a process of more like a theory of where your data is going to be mastered, as opposed to a specific technology. Because like you said, there are specific MDM systems. You can use that. And, the idea here is that in theory, like all of your data can kind of go in here and you create like a golden record that then becomes a source system for all of your other systems. But you don't necessarily need to do that if you don't want to. Yeah, I mean, you can go through and identify this system is the source. Let's say that this is the source system for employee data, and like you said, it's got a community, it's got an employee portal that employees can go and update their own data. This ERP system has employee data in it because it's also got your payroll and everything else, but it's maybe it's the actual source system for all of your financial and accounting data. And then this org over here, your sales team is using it, and it's the source for all of your accounts and contacts, customer accounts and contacts. But maybe it has a little bit of financial data. Because you've got data, you've got opportunities closing, and you've got people collecting, or if you're a nonprofit and you've got people collecting donations. So it has a little bit of financial data in it, but that's not really the be all end all place where you're doing your accounting. You're just kind of collecting it and then sending it off to another system that does it. So yeah, so I kind of like the idea. And if you do want to really get fancy and have an overall master data management system externally that is its own separate system, that everything kind of gets entered and goes into that system, and it gets it gets used to create a golden record. You can do that. It's but I think to your point, it's not necessarily it's not required, I guess.
No, I think that's exactly it. So I have an example from a long time ago. It's a non-profit example, which should help some of our audience, I hope, in that it was about people. So we had supporters, we had volunteers, we had people that were attending events, and we had employees. So that's already, we're talking about 4 different systems, and we're talking about potentially quite a big crossover in how people interact with the organization. So immediately you think, right, master data management. So the master data management project was created. That project started looking at the complexities involved in integrating with some of these systems. It was a while back, so maybe not everything was so perfectly API led, right? So there was some interesting challenges to overcome, some real thought put into this, until somebody decided to just check how much data we were talking about. So the crossover of folks that were employees and volunteers and supporters was something like 0.02%. It was a ridiculously low percentage of the number of supporters that existed, at which point you really have to question the validity of doing it, right? Because if that's the case now, and you understand growth and you don't expect a massive surge in employees suddenly becoming volunteers, or volunteers becoming supporters, or supporters becoming either of those two or both, then you really need to question the validity of this technology that feels like it's going to solve all your problems, but almost certainly will cause you more headaches than value. Additionally, we also discovered there really was only one place where these people started out live. Supporters were only created in one system. The employees were only created and maintained in one system. So if you need a piece of information from one of those, and maybe it's dependent in a sequence of updates like you've shown here, then you could use something like ETL or ESB or some other model to just move those components of data at the right time, or make them visible, read-only somewhere else. This idea of MDM quite simply gets removed when you start looking at the overall picture and the fundamental complexity, if you like, of what you're trying to deal with. I know it was at the top of everyone's mind a number of years ago, but I think there are different ways and different business value focuses to have now before you just go there.
Right. And not to completely discount MDM system, there are some pretty strong use cases for them. If you do have a number of different systems that have contacts coming in, and you want to, and some of those contacts might overlap, for example, and you're setting up marketing automation, and you want to make sure that you're not sending a bunch of duplicate emails because you've got a bunch of duplicate contacts in your marketing system. You can kind of use an MDM as a intermediary source that does all your deduplication and data scrubbing and everything, and then creates a unique ID for that contact, for each contact in your marketing automation system. So, but I think overall, to your point, it's a matter of you having the right tool for the right job. And if just buying one just because you can, and because you think it's, like you said, a few years ago, everyone thought that this was going to solve all their problems, and a lot of organizations implemented them, and they're still struggling with their master data management, because it's not because of the tool wouldn't do what it was designed to do. It was because they didn't really think through their processes of where, what do we consider to be our, where should we be mastering our data, and what actual records are we talking about, and where do they originate, and what are the sources, and and where do we need to be storing this data? So
it's a really good point. I didn't mean to sound quite so anti-MDM. That came, but that is the point. You're absolutely right. There are, I think they have a really good use case in a lot of large organisations that maybe have some legacy processes still dealing with things like local access databases or local spreadsheet solutions, right? Where you need to combine all of this data. You need to understand where people are creating some of these the data sources and managing data in a way that's not optimal, should we say. MDM can help for sure. As you say, digit, combine, create this golden record so that it can be used and relied upon in your corporate systems and core systems, for sure.
Right. And one of the other things too, I think this is kind of interesting, is, like you said, though, MDM, I think it's because as ETL systems have evolved, you actually can do some of that deduplication and everything in an ETL platform today that you didn't, in a way that you didn't used to be able to do 10 years ago. And that's another reason. So MDM, you still have a storage place though, where it's kind of persistent, but again, there's no right or wrong answer here to whether you need an MDM system or not, as much as you need to think about where it really fits if you are going to get one. I think is really what we're. And shifting gears one other a little bit is if we do think about patterns a little. So, what are your thoughts on doing a nightly batch job versus doing a real time or near real time integration, and where where one might be a benefit over the other? Because it's one of the other things I see that people tend to think that everything needs to be real time. And
the ubiquitous integration myth, right?
Right.
So you just don't. You just are very unlikely to find an organisation that needs everything real time. And let's be clear, real time, if you're going to get picky, doesn't exist, right? This is as near real time as you can make it. But let's take that as a given for a moment. Real time versus batch. A lot of this is about performance and understanding where you need performance and where you don't. And batch control gives you the opportunity to deal with large volumes of data in a controlled way. So if you're working with large data volumes, batch is going to help you. Real time is going to help you visualize some of these smaller sets of data more easily. So there's a simple performance trade-off to think about.
I know I've worked with a lot of customers that they kind of have this everything needs to be real time, and I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. And I'll actually give you an example of a place that we didn't. Right. So I had a customer in the past that received 18 terabytes of data of consumer retail sales data once a month, dropped in an FTP folder, and they would have to process it. And so then they had a big batch integration that ran nightly rather. It was over the weekend. So they would only get this file once a month. They would import it into their data warehouse. They had a variety of, they had kind of some staging tables. They had, that they would kind of clean up the data, get rid of any records that they didn't need. They had some core tables that, okay, here's all the clean data that now that we've deduplicated everything and we've we've got everything that we want all together. And then they had a layer of they call them semantic tables, which actually were used for reporting. And every one of these jobs that move data, first of all, into the data warehouse itself, And then from the core layer to the staging layer to the semantic layer was every one of these was a batch job that was handled by the ETL tool. And really, when you're looking at a data when you're looking at a volume of records that's that big, first of all, you're not going to be able to do a real-time integration. But second of all, you don't really need it anyway. I mean, processing would happen overnight, and it would be done. I think it would happen on a Friday night, and it'd be done by somewhere midday on Saturday. And so by the time you get the whatever reports you want to do, which are the semantic layer is kind of an aggregate of all the data that came from this. You're obviously hopefully not running a running a report with 18 terabytes of records. But by the time they got down to all the data was sorted, deduplicated, aggregated, everything to the point where their executives were able to read these reports. And then they had a small subset of this data that also made its way into Salesforce for their sales reps to use in future sales calls. But the point is, nobody was going to be doing anything with that data until the following Monday at the earliest anyway. There was plenty of time for the data to be processed over the weekend. And, by the time someone would come into work Monday morning, they had everything they needed. Trying to build a real-time or even near real-time integration to that, it actually doesn't add any benefit. And aside from the fact that it may or may not even be possible to do, right? So, and yeah, I was wondering, what do you think? I mean, I know that in some cases it might make sense if you're doing something like a mashup, or there are some other types of places where real-time data works, but there's also a lot of overhead that goes with real-time integrations as well, right?
Yeah, for sure, there are overheads, and I mean, whilst you don't get the delay between the two systems, obviously it's near real time or real time, you are talking about usually something that's more complex and more expensive to set up in the first place and maintain. You've got to understand what the business use is. You can't. This is another one where technology can't make the decision in isolation, unless you understand the context of what this data is going to be used for and when. Then you can't make the call on real time versus batch. Batch is going to be more efficient at larger volumes for certain, but if it's something that you do need updated for, you mentioned a report, maybe not on 18 terabytes, but nonetheless, if it's a report that you do need and you need up-to-date information for your sales reps, for your fundraisers, for your recruiters in educational organizations, when you're looking at these kind of things, you need more up-to-date information for sure. That's where real-time at smaller scale of data volumes might make some sense. There's an auditing piece here as well. So this is why finance organizations and processes run on batch these days. I know that's changing with some of the open banking standards and approaches that are certainly happening over here in EMEA, but you will still find batch at the core, batch activities at the core of what finance is doing. Most of that is because you need checks and balances, because you need to know that something is right before you progress it to the next stage. And you need to be able to go back and say what happened in a given scenario for a given set of data. And that is usually easier when you're talking about batch processes. Less so with real time, because you have to capture that auditing activity. You have to keep it somewhere in a way that means you can interrogate it later. And sure, there are event monitoring solutions, there are abilities to capture and interrogate logs, etc., for those kind of real-time integrations. But it is simpler more often than not with batch. So I get back to the business. It's always, I know I sound like a broken record, I'm sure, but these things that feel like technology decisions, they so rarely are. It's almost certainly going to be a conversation that's driven by understanding your business use cases and your business processes. So talk to the teams, talk to the people that know.
Yeah, that auditing piece is actually, that's a really good call out, because if I do a batch integration, if I say something, I need to know, let's see here, I need to know exactly when this record, a particular record got updated in whatever system it is, that if I do a batch job, I know that the updates run every night. I've got a history of log files I can go through and analyze, and I can find the specific day that the record was updated, right? If it's real time, yeah, there's probably some logging, but the fact that that record could have been updated by anybody at any time, and then whenever it got updated, then it headed over, it went over to the target system as soon as the update was completed, as soon as the record was saved. I can sort through log files and find that, but that's going to be a lot more like searching for a needle in a haystack than just being able to look at a bunch of nightly logs from nightly jobs and say, okay, last Tuesday, it looks like this was when that record got updated. Done, right? It's as opposed to I don't know. Let's look through every record that's been saved over the last 2 weeks and hope we find it, right? So yeah, that's a really good call out. And like you said, that's not really a technology decision, because really you could build, in most cases, if you put the data volumes aside, because there are going to be some things that physically limit you from doing it. But if it's a small number of records, there's probably a way to build the integration either way. So you can kind of think, just think about, great, you want a real-time integration, we'll build it. But it is really more of a business decision than a technical decision around, okay, but why would you build it that way? And why do you need it? Why do you need it real time? If I'm running a nuclear power plant and I need to know when something's about to fail, I absolutely need real-time integrations between whatever systems are operating the plant and my reporting system. If I'm updating address data or something that's going to go in a report that someone might not even look at until the end of the month, maybe batch is actually fine, right? So, yeah, awesome. Any other thoughts? I mean, I know there's so many other like topics and things that we can cover. I mean, integration itself is such a big, it's such a broad topic, and just in the few minutes that we've been talking about it, we've built out this big ugly looking spaghetti diagram here. So I don't know, is there anything like major that we that you were thinking that we might want to talk about that we didn't?
I think this is the core of it, right? We started with a nice simple picture of a single org that grew very quickly to 3 Salesforce orgs that were then related together in some way because some data needed to move. Then we realized it was going to get a bit more complicated when you added non-Salesforce systems and extra data sets that maybe you didn't have quite so much control over. Then we have a conversation about orchestration. Orchestration moves you through to a concept of what else do you need to do in order to get data moving around, whether that's streaming and events-based or whether that's pure rules-based. If you move that through to understanding if real-time or batch is going to work best and what kind of time frame are you looking at, needing to work with the business across all of these, I think that covers it really neatly. Whether you're talking about a bus type approach, which is what ETL, Enterprise Service Bus kind of technologies are starting to look towards, whether you're looking at hub and spoke, whether you're looking at point to point, all of these involve understanding the scale and type of data you're working with, understanding whether it's worth doing and calculating your ROI, working with your business organizations to make sure you understand the usage of the data that's being moved around, and really getting to grips with the processes this stuff's supporting. Because one of the auditing pieces is fine, understand if something's happening. There's a monitoring component that goes alongside all integrations. And for me, the bit that sometimes gets left behind is the impact on business processes when an integration fails. So you understand what happens. The data doesn't go from A to B anymore, or from A to B to C to D anymore. But maybe you don't know what that means to the business communities you're supporting in as much detail as you should. So then you have to try and triage that from the hundreds of calls that are flooding into your service desk. So I guess the one thing to layer on top of this, no matter which model and which architecture you choose, no matter which patterns you choose to move data around between these systems, remember to keep your business folks at the center of it, monitor and understand the impact of something not behaving quite like it should do.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point too, is so let's just say in our big old scenario here, I've got contact data that originates in this org. ultimately it goes in this org, and this is the one that my users are accessing on their mobile devices when they're going out in the field and doing whatever work they're doing. Somehow this integration fails. Now, this may not actually, it may not even be apparent to your end users that the integration fails. They've just got old data that they're working off of because it never got updated. And if you don't actually have somebody that's, you know, and the nice thing is ETL tools, they do have these kind of reporting and, you know, they do have these kind of reporting and logging tools that you can use. And hopefully, you know, this is one of the other things, well, completely different topic altogether, but if we talk about like governance and that, you know, you really should have somebody, if you're going to stand this up, you should have somebody that's an expert with that tool that's monitoring it, because if this integration suddenly stops working and nobody notices it and it goes unnoticed for a few days, all of a sudden you've got, you know, stale data in your target system that may be affecting your business. You know, it may even affect your revenue. And one of the advantages of using an actual tool for this is that if I have, you know, a direct connection and it fails, unless you've actually built some custom logging and you know, way to actually tell that integration failed, it may even go even longer than without you knowing that it failed. You're just not getting record updates. And to your point, you may or may not know how that affects your business. It may be as simple as, you know, your salespeople going, oh, I guess that person doesn't work here anymore when they go to call on a contact. But it may also be, you know, there's a lot of critical information that I'm not able to get. And because of that, I wasn't able to, you know, collect some donations, or I wasn't able to make a sale, or I wasn't able to do whatever. And all of a sudden now my, you know, it's not just one salesperson that it's happening to, it's all of them. And it, you know, you suddenly start to see issues with your relationships between your customers, issues with your revenue, and a variety of other things that all because something you don't even realize is going on in the background of data not being copied from one system to the other one correctly.
Yeah, definitely. I think you mentioned governance there, right? So slight tangent, I guess, but the other thing, we've obviously built this picture out. We started, as I said, simply, and we've moved outwards into this more complex. And we've decided that that's the way to go through discussion today. For example, we've had a conversation about it and discovered that our pretend organization needed these things. In the real world, there would need to be control over how you develop and evolve your integration solutions, and not just about controlling and monitoring the day-to-day, but the wider piece of, when does a system become a target for, or a source for integration? What do we do for the rest of the integration components? And managing that change of your entire integration architecture, I feel quite strongly should be part of your wider governance piece, alongside your Salesforce design, right, and your build, and your data management, and your security design, all these other good things that you know you're controlling in your estate. Make sure integration is one of them.
Yeah. And when you think about your overall enterprise architecture, if I decide that I want to retire this database, I don't need it anymore, but I can get my address information from this system, whatever. You still got to think about this integration that's kind of hanging off here now, that, you know, what else are you sending over? And are you really sure that it's just address information that you're getting? What were you sending to it? And, you know, if you had other information going back into it, are you going to cause a bunch of other integrations to fail that are going to, you know, then create a chain reaction that are going to cause other processes to fail? So that becomes part of your overall integration strategy in general, where, like you said, it's not, a lot of these are not going to just be kind of a build it and forget it type of thing. It really is, you should have somebody that's an integration expert. If you're going to build something out that looks, you know, this complex, you should have an integration expert that's willing to, or that's able to, you know, have those types of discussions as your architecture continues to evolve. And with that, I think we're almost at time. So just wanted to go back and come back here. We've got just a few more housekeeping things. So like I said, we've got a trail mix below that has some white papers. There's an architect journey for integration architecture if you are interested in the integration architecture certification, and also give a quick plug for the Architect Academy Roundtables group in the Power of Us Hub, that if you join it, we will post the recording of this. We'll also post the presentation materials and other future announcements of other broadcasts that we're going to be doing. So I think with that, thank you for attending, and hope you found this session to be valuable.